Hello and welcome to the Savage Movie Night Podcast. Today we are talking all about the 2010 classic Black Swan. I'm your remembering the time they got kicked out of Lincoln Center host, Adam. Joining me, as always, is my trashing every dressing room she sees just for fun co-host, Kristen. Hi, Kristen.
Hey, well, they didn't have the M&Ms in the dressing room, so I got really upset.
Well, you also learn from the best in Winona Ryder.
Icon.
And of course, the show wouldn't be complete without always encouraging others to get ahead via seduction co-host Rob. Hi, Rob.
Adam, Kristen, how you guys doing?
Good.
Good.
Yeah. Glad to be back discussing another great movie. So, what is your guys' familiarity with Black Swan?
It's interesting because I remember seeing the trailers for this when it first came out and not being all that interested, and then finding it years later and then really falling in love with it. And I think it's one of those movies that like people found a couple years later and then were like, wow, this is really, really good actually. And when it comes to Darren Aronofsky, outside of this one, I have only seen Mother, which is also one of my all-time favorite movies. Absolute nightmare fuel, just anxiety for 2 hours, but I love it.
I wasn't familiar with this movie at all until I just watched it. And can you remind me what the director also did?
He did Pi, Requiem for a Dream, The Fountain, The Wrestler, Noah, and The Whale. And Mother.
Oh, I forgot. I did indeed watch The Wrestler before this. So actually, I forgot I have seen that one too.
I think I saw The Wrestler.
Yeah, Mickey Rourke. We'll talk about all his movies he made before this here in part one, and we'll talk about the movies he made after this in part two.
One of the more recent films from Aronofsky was The Whale with Brendan Fraser, if you're familiar with that one, Rob.
I know what it is. I just never saw it.
Yeah, me neither, but I have heard a lot of buzz about it.
For me, I saw Black Swan not in theaters, but sometime when it came out on home video not long after. And I mean, because it had a ton of, buzz around it, as we'll talk about. And, I really enjoyed it. I'd seen The Wrestler by then, obviously, for me. I'd also seen The Fountain. At the time I originally saw The Fountain, I did not care for it. Through this, I watched every Aronofsky movie, including the ones I'd already seen. I rewatched them. This second time around, I actually really liked The Fountain. And I'd seen, this is after Black Swan, but I saw Noah in theaters. I won't. I'll give you my thoughts on Noah when we talk about it in part two, but my thoughts ended up being the same this time around. So I wasn't really sure how I felt about Aronofsky, and overall, I now really like him and appreciate his movies. And Kristen, I know you said you think it's one people discovered later. How much of that was because how old were you when it came out?
You forget, 2010, I'm still a teenager. I'm like 15, But
that's what I mean, is like you're saying from your perspective, lots of people didn't discover it until
let me explain why I feel this way. Because the generation below mine are into this movie. So the teens, and the early 20s, which I'm not that anymore, are really into this film and found it. And so I feel like there's been multiple like resurgences with this one. And so that's why I feel that way, because I remember it was like I think I was of the opinion that it wasn't going to be my thing, and then all of a sudden, in about the late 2010s, early 2020s, is when people started talking about this movie a lot, and that was when I think that it came onto my radar again.
Yeah, no, I guess because it just made it sound like people weren't necessarily into it or talking about it when it first came out. Which is why, and I thought that might be a perspective thing, because, we'll kind of see, especially in part two, how, the world of 2010 reacted to it. But, that was not my impression at the time, that people were, maybe sleeping on it and didn't know much about it, at least in the more, adult world.
Coincidentally, the rates of mental health issues have risen during this time frame that we're talking about.
Yeah. But, we'll also talk about, there were a lot of indicators of, late 2000s, early 2010s, from, just like some style things to, a few tech things and some other stuff that just went, man, I remember that time period, and this just reeks of it. Anyway, in today's episode, we are going to learn how Batman really began in the 2000s, why Z's are better than S's, and most importantly, why Big League Chew is here, because we are talking all about the 2010 Darren Aronofsky classic Black Swan. But first, a word from our sponsors. Today's sponsor is No Regrets, the music and spirit of Billie Holiday, an in-depth 13-episode radio and live streaming series celebrating Billie Holiday's extraordinary musical legacy. The program explores her early life, groundbreaking singing style, and the powerful impact of Strange Fruit on the civil rights movement. It is produced by the award-winning Steve Robinson and written by NEA Jazz Grandmaster and host of Jazzology, Willard Jenkins. No Regret is narrated by Rhonda Hamilton. The series features interviews with Angela Davis, Cassandra Wilson, Beth Roars, Andromeda Toure, Phil Schaap, Dan Morgenstern, and many more. All episodes of No Regrets, the music and spirit of Billie Holiday, are now ready for you to stream on savagecontent.com/no regrets. That's savagecontent.com/no regrets. Darren Aronofsky was born on February 12, 1969 in Brooklyn to parents of Polish and Jewish descent. He was raised in Manhattan Beach alongside his older sister. Aronofsky has said of the religious side of his upbringing that they didn't focus on the spiritual side of their Jewish heritage, and to them, quote, it was a cultural thing, celebrating the holidays and knowing where you came from, knowing your history, having respect for what your people have been through, unquote. In Manhattan Beach, he said he grew up surrounded by Jewish and African American and Greek kids. He said, quote, we were all listening to the same music, dancing to the same steps, doing the same drugs, unquote, and joked, quote, I'd say 50% of my friends became millionaires on Wall Street, and the other half are probably drug dealers, unquote. While his older sister Patty attended a professional ballet school, Darren graduated from Edward R. Murrow High School that, according to Wikipedia, is dedicated to the arts, and students can audition for programs in music, fine arts, and visual arts or theater. He also had an interest in field biology, taking summer programs in Kenya and Alaska via the School for Field Studies. After high school, he went to Harvard in 1987. Originally, he was going to be a social studies major, but didn't like the coursework and felt it was too rigorous. He wanted to switch to art to an art major of some kind, but didn't think his parents would approve, and instead switched to social anthropology, which was easier for him, and sought out art classes he could add. He tried to get into sculpture and filmmaking classes, but only made it into the filmmaking class. From there, he met new friends like Sean Gillette, who would become a frequent collaborator. Despite majoring in social anthropology, his senior thesis was a short film called Supermarket Sweep and was nominated for a Student Academy Award in 1991, the year he graduated. After Harvard, he went on to a master's program at the American Film Institute. This is the same program David Lynch attended about 20 years earlier, as you can hear in our previous episode on Dune, Savage Movie Night podcast episode number 5. Other future directors and writers in the program at the same time as Aronofsky include Todd Fields, writer and director of Tar, Doug Ellen, creator of Entourage, Scott Silver, writer of 8 Mile, The Fighter, which was produced by Aronofsky, and both Joker movies, and Mark Waters, director of Freaky Friday and Mean Girls.
That's quite a collection of other people he's in with. And I mean, Aronofsky is also considered like an iconic director at this point.
Yeah.
And I think with stuff like The Whale, I feel like it even further solidified it that he still got it.
I mean, that's what makes it so remarkable that he is in this class with so many other names. Because, I mean, a lot of times, even at a prestigious program like AFI, usually it's like, okay, one guy out of a class every few years, goes on to be a major name and do something of note. Whereas all these guys were there at the same time and, did a ton of note.
Yeah, they were pumping out a bunch of them at the same time. They probably like hyped that year up as like a big thing for their program, I bet. Like they probably have a whole section dedicated to it.
I would think, but it was just, well, and just the variety of, the director of Freaky Friday and Mean Girls, the creator of Entourage, and like Scott Silver, he's got the weirdest one, 8 Mile and the Fighter, being connected to the guy who wrote and directed Tar and, Darren Aronofsky. That kind of makes sense. The Joker movies are a little less, out of left field, but but then connecting those three to the Entourage and Freaky Friday and Mean Girls guys, that's where it starts to get a little like, wait, what?
Were you able to find what his like supermarket sweep thing was about?
I could not. I tried very hard. His AFI short films are available, but I could not find because I was very curious because obviously I think it's some connection to the game show, and so I really wanted to check it out, but I could not find it. I tried as hard as Google would let me.
Oh well, we can just imagine and theorize.
Yeah. The next section is more of a little fun divergence before we get back to the main path. In the most random side note ever, let's take a little detour that will somewhat tie back to everything, I promise. In 1973, an independent baseball team, the Portland Mavericks, were founded. Initially co-owned by Bing Russell, a former minor league player himself and TV actor, he would buy out his co-owner at the end of the season to become the sole owner. Bing's son, Kurt Russell, a bit of a baseball player who was also known to try his hand in acting, played for the team briefly in that first season. In 1977, the final season for the ill-fated Mavericks, pitcher Rob Nelson watched a 13-year-old bat boy with a pouch of licorice shredded to resemble chewing tobacco, very popular among adult baseball players at the time. He thought of that shortly after when talking with former New York Yankee Jim Burton about how neither of them cared for chewing tobacco, and Burton commented that he liked gum more. Nelson connected that thought to the Bat Boy and had an idea for a product, but no way to produce it. 2 years later, still important, he learned of a make-your-own gum kit you could order and sent for one. He didn't have the right equipment in his kitchen, so he went to the former Bat Boy and his mother and asked if he could use their kitchen. They agreed, and that Bat Boy helped him perfect the initial prototype over the course of several batches. With Burton's help, Nelson was able to sell the idea to the Wrigley Company as a healthy alternative to chewing gum for kids, and Big League Chew, as it was now called, began to be sold all across the country in May of 1980. How does this connect to anything we're talking about? That future Bat Boy was Oscar nominee Todd Fields.
Crazy.
So wait, not even anything related to this film. It's just one of the guys we talked about in the previous section. I was like, who's Todd Fields? I had to go back up. I was what are we even talking about here? Sorry.
Yeah. I realize it's only tangentially related, but it was just weird that I came across this, like not even looking for stuff about Todd Fields. I think someone else mentioned the creation of Big League Chew, I was like, that doesn't sound right. And I looked more into it and I was like, holy crap, Todd Fields? And then I was like, holy crap, Kurt Russell and Bing Russell, and just like all these weird connections. And it's like, I have to share this story. I'm sorry.
It's a wild one. I hope he puts it on his resume.
I didn't realize how Big League Chew was only started not long before I was born. Only a few years before I was born. Because it was just a staple of my childhood, and something they still make today. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever have Big League Chew growing up?
I think I'm missing a few teeth due to Big League Chew. Yes.
I never did, but I don't know. I was kind of picky about candy even because I didn't like chocolate. This isn't chocolate, but because I was very picky, choosy with my candy.
Yeah. No, I totally get it.
Honestly, my mom probably is glad that I never got into it.
Oh yeah, but no, I definitely remember, because like Big League Chew, and then there was also like bubble tape when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
And so just like the stuff where you would just take like way too much of it, and so like your cheeks are bulging like a squirrel, and like spit's like coming down your mouth, but you're still chewing anyway. Great stuff.
Candy good.
Yes.
Candy good.
Big League Chew good, and that's just a fun story. But now up until this point, Darren's timeline has been fairly straightforward and makes sense. We're about to get a little less certain about what Darren was up to, because during his time at AFI, Darren makes 3 student films, the last of which came out in 1994. His first feature, spoilers, comes out in 1998. We'll talk about how it comes about in a minute. So, what was he up to in those 3 or 4 years in between? We're not really sure. His Wikipedia and the sources Wikipedia pull from skip from AFI to the first feature like he was right out of school when he made it. I could only find one credit for him during this time, and it's an odd one. In 1997, a video game was released called Soldier Boys. Yes, boys with a Z because it's the 90s. That was an FMV on-rails shooter. What the hell does any of that mean, and how does it involve Darren Aronofsky? On-rails mean the player had no control of where you go. Think of games where the game drives a car while you fire a gun or something like that. FMV means full motion video, a style of game most popular in the 90s and early 2000s when computer graphics were much worse. They would use actual full motion video for the game instead, especially cutscenes. It was an actual Soldier Boys was an actual adaptation / port of a 1995 movie of the same name starring American ninja himself, Michael Dudikoff, and had something to do about Vietnam vets getting pulled from death row to escape to rescue the kidnapped daughter of a billionaire. It doesn't really matter. Now, Darren is credited as a director. Cutscenes. There's a different director for the overall game, and one of the developers of the game, and wasn't involved in the original movie. So I don't know what he actually did here. But was it any good? It would seem not, as the reviews I have found all hate it, which also match the reviews of the film. So it all becomes questions all the way down. Why did this get made? No one seemed to want it. How did it get made? There doesn't seem to be much of a strategy behind it. How and why did Darren get involved? And finally, did it really take all the time between the last short and his first feature? Because this is all I could find that he was involved in. Please, someone listening, the next time you're at a dinner party with Darren, sipping wine and eating cheese or whatever, ask him about Soldier Boys, please. Make sure you really emphasize the Z when you do. I'm sure he'll love it.
Not everybody is super productive as soon as they graduate. He could have just been faffing off for 3 years trying to figure himself out. I don't blame him if that's the truth. You know, you aren't always instantly successful or doing work right from school. So
well, it makes a lot of sense when you have friends that are millionaires and crooks.
Yeah, but we'll talk about it like when we get to the next section, because like what he does next matches I'm just out of, like, fits perfectly if he was just out of school as well. But so it's just weird that there was this gap, because while he has gaps later on in his career, they're usually explained by like unrealized projects and stuff. And I wasn't finding anything like people talked about, like, oh, he tried to raise financing for this project and it just didn't work, or anything like that. I was just seeing, this one, or like he was working as a PA on this and doing this, so it just didn't match the ambition and drive he showed the rest of his before and after this period, and or anything else with his career. So I just found it odd. And then to find him connected to this piece of material was extra odd. And again, I just was like, what the hell is this? I have to talk about it, especially because it gives us a chance to talk about the 90s, when we loved replacing S's with Z's, especially when spelling the word boys.
Yeah, what was up with that? Why was that so cool in the 90s?
Sometimes it was because it's more trademarkable.
Right, that makes sense.
But it was also, it was edgy. It was extreme. Calling everything extreme and not even spelling it with extreme, but just spelling it with an X stream. That
this is that middle America getting urban.
Well, urban and alternative, cultures, so like X Games and stuff like that, it's all part of that. This is actually on Darren's IMDb. So like if he wasn't involved, like, because someone at his level, like, they know what's on their IMDb and would have it changed. And so I everything I've found seems to, like, this is accurate. So it's, like I said, just very interesting and strange, but yeah. But after that detour, in 1997, Aronofsky began working on his first feature in earnest. Typical of many of the emerging young independent filmmakers of the era like Quentin Tarantino and Kevin Smith, he borrowed money from friends and family and in general did anything he could to get whatever minuscule budget he could. Eventually, he secured a $60,000 production budget with about another $68,000 for post-production. He would reunite with his friend from Harvard, Sean Gillette, who would star in the story of a genius mathematician pushed to the edge by his own obsession and begins to question the very nature of his own reality. The film would premiere at the 1998 Sundance and quickly get picked up for distribution for $1 million. To follow up this success, he jumped right into his next project, acquiring the rights to the novel Requiem for a Dream and securing a budget of $3.5 million and big-name actors like Ellen Burstyn, Jared Leto, and Jennifer Connelly. The film, like the novel, would tell the story of drug addicts driven to obsession and questioning the nature of their own reality. Starting to sense a theme. Released in theaters in October of 2000, the film would double its budget at the box office, a success for an art house film made by an up-and-coming director, but most importantly, it was a smash with critics, earning numerous awards and nominations, including an Academy Award nomination for Ellen Burstyn. As he entered 2001, Aronofsky was one of the hottest young directors in Hollywood and could pick his project. Now is also the best time to bring up another relevant detour. In 1997, an anime was released in Japan called Perfect Blue, and told the story of a pop singer from a mid-level girl act who leaves the group to try to get into acting. As she faces the pressure from the big changes, she begins to question her own reality in a way that mirrors what her character is going through in the role she is acting in. In Requiem, there is a famous shot of Jennifer Connelly's character in the bathtub after a very traumatic moment that is an exact duplicate of one in Perfect Blue when that character is going through a trauma as well. While directors often reference shots from and setups from other works all the time, see a Star Wars New Hope metal scene and Triumph of the Will, or the Untouchables stair scene and Battleship Potemkin. This was so blatant that a rumor arose that Aronofsky, who is an admitted fan of Perfect Blue, had acquired the rights to remake the film or otherwise reach some sort of licensing agreement for the shot. Perfect Blue director Satoshi Kon, however, put this rumor to bed, saying that around 2000 or 2001, he did have talks with Aronofsky about Darren acquiring the rights to remake the film, and they progressed fairly far, but ultimately were never complete for unknown reasons. He was very clear that these talks were never completed and unrelated to Requiem. We'll leave that here, but just remember Perfect Blue, as it may show up again later.
Yeah, it's interesting that that you found that he said that nothing was ever bought, because I was under the impression that he had bought some sort of right for it, and that was why it was he had utilized it in Requiem for a Dream. I didn't realize that it never actually went through.
Yeah, I saw a lot of a lot of cross information about that, and as I was digging into sources, I saw something else say, with Khan specifically saying that while there were talks, it was never finalized, and that it was specific because a lot of what I was seeing was saying that that he got the rights because of that, because so he could do that shot in Requiem, and this was basically saying no, that none of that's true. He never licensed it. None of the talks were ever around Requiem, and what talks we did have were never complete. So,
in music, there's a term for that, interpolation. I don't know if it's a similar thing in film, but that's what it reminds me of.
No, I mean there is, and I mean it's always that fine line between showing giving credit to your inspirations or whatever, and giving shout outs to things you find cool, and just being a ripoff, and there's always going to be that debate. Some artists are more subtle when they do homages, just like Rob. Some artists in music are more subtle, this really doesn't sound like anything they did, but it sounds like something they would do, and so that's my homage to them. It's in the spirit of them, whereas other people will do okay, our homage to them is playing including little riff from one of their songs or something. The way he financed that first film was very much what you would expect someone from his level, where he basically hit up all his friends and family for small dollar donations, not donations, because it's an agreement of you'll get if the film is successful, you get your money back, but did that to raise $60,000. And it's not clear, maybe it was his work on Soldier Boys or what else, because it's not clear where the other 68,000 came from. But regardless, that's a fairly typical story, like Kevin Smith, talked about, and Tarantino was the same way, that they just took out a bunch of credit cards and maxed them out to finance their initial movies. Well, and part of the way they did that was because they both worked at video stores at the time, and were like managers. And so like the credit card companies would call to verify the information, and they would be the ones answering the phone and just, oh yeah, no, he makes this amount of money, and blah blah blah. Even though it was all bull. And obviously, like those are great fun stories now. They're technically crimes, that they just got away with it because they were successful, whereas if, the movies had flopped, they would have been in real trouble.
Yeah, or people would have made fun of them for doing all that, probably, if they hadn't been successful.
Around the time of the release of Requiem, Aronofsky first meets actress Natalie Portman. Portman, at this time, despite only being 19, was a massive star already. She had made her on-screen debut with the acclaimed, now cult classic Leon the Professional in 1994, and followed it up with roles in big films like Heat and Mars Attacks. She was in the middle of her role as Queen Amidala in the Star Wars prequel trilogy, when Darren spoke with her about the idea of a movie set in the world of ballet. They agreed it would be a great project for them to work together on, and Darren keeps her in mind for that project as he continues figuring things out. Remember this for later, as it may show up again. As a big-name young director, now big studios with big properties will approach you, and one of those was Warner Brothers with their Batman franchise. In early 2000, Batman was in a bad spot, coming off the fat kid belly flop that was 1997's Batman and Robin. Sorry to all the millennials with nostalgia, that movie is trash. Fun trash at times, but trash. Warner was looking to reboot the franchise with the help of a hip new director with a distinctive vision, not unlike Tim Burton when he had launched the movies in 1989. Aronofsky began working with Frank Miller, the comic book legend behind Daredevil, The Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year One, Sin City, and 300, amongst many others. Miller had also worked on the scripts for RoboCop 2 and RoboCop 3. They used Year One as a starting point, not basing the script on it exactly, but using the idea of Batman at the beginning as a starting point for a grittier, darker, more grounded approach. They wanted the film to be a hard R. Things progressed enough that Christian Bale was approached to play Bruce Wayne/Batman, and he agreed. However, the project stalled out, and in 2001, Aronofsky moved on to other things.
I don't have much skin in the game when it comes to Batman, so I don't really have much to say on this matter, but I'm sure you guys have a lot of nostalgia for all of the Batman stuff.
Well, it was just another interesting almost what if, and is especially interesting considering, we kind of know where this goes, that it laid the groundwork for much of what did actually occur. And the other thing with Natalie Portman, I mentioned she was only 19. She was already a big star. She was also attending Harvard at the time. She had that conversation because she is a Harvard graduate with a degree, I think, in like psychology or something. It's not like acting.
Good for her. That's awesome. Well, you got the money. Why not?
Yeah. Well, and it was part of her, like, because she was a child star, she was trying to be, maintaining her career in that period. You see, it's definitely less active than in other times. That she was trying to also just be a normal, grounded person as best she could, which was cool. Rob, did you ever see Batman and Robin?
I think, is this the one that, the movie that you're referencing that was really bad, is that the one with...
Schwarzenegger and Uma Thurman.
Right, no. It looks
George Clooney. Yeah, not good. And maybe it's my own personal nostalgia. I like Batman Forever better. I mean, like, I can enjoy bits of Batman and Robin, and I can, like, enjoy watching it as a trashy movie, but I also don't think it's a good movie. But there are, like, millennials now who will be like, no, Batman and Robin was good. No, it wasn't. Stop. But now, in Now in 2001, Darren had left some sort of Batman Beginning project with Christian Bale that would probably have been a flop. Like, even if they revive it with a different visionary young director, it's not going to be good or anything, right? So, before we talk about what he did next, we do have to talk about his personal life briefly, as it does become relevant. Sometime in 2001, Aronofsky meets and begins a relationship with actress Rachel Weisz, at this time most well known for her role in the Mummy franchise along Brendan Fraser. Having left Batman behind, Darren stuck with Warner Brothers and began work on a film about three different men in three different times, obsessively searching for the key to eternal life to the point they questioned their own reality. I'm beginning to notice a theme. Anyway, Brad Pitt became attached along with Cate Blanchett, and pre-production on what was now called The Fountain moved forward with a tentative start date of summer 2002. However, the budget kept rising, now up to $70 million, with $18 million being spent on prep, causing a concern at the studio. Production was set to begin in October officially, until 7 weeks before shooting, with Aronofsky already on location. Pitt pulled out, citing concerns with the script that Aronofsky had not addressed. With Brad out, Warner pulled the funding and the project slid into limbo. That $18 million spent on prep was once the project folded. Darren began working on other projects, but eventually returned to The Fountain and reworked the script, trimming the budget. Warner Brothers stepped back in for the now $35 million film, with Hugh Jackman in the lead in place of Brad Pitt. And as production grew closer, Blanchett became unavailable. And Aronofsky looked around and asked the person sitting next to him on the couch if she wanted to be in a movie. So Rachel Weisz took over the role. Production began at the end of 2004, and the film premiered in September of 2006. The film was a flop at the box office and got only a tepid response from critics. During production in 2005, Weisz and Aronofsky announced their engagement, and in 2006 they announced the birth of their son. With their prospects not as bright, Darren had to once again think about what was next.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a pattern about the questioning reality part, but also I noticed that he takes on these like really big ideas, like the big like the not like a tale, like a tale as old as time kind of thing, and then like doing his own spin on it, which we've seen in other ones we haven't talked about yet, like Mother and Noah and stuff like that. Just the idea of like taking a tale that people know or are familiar with and then kind of revamping and reworking it. So you can kind of see early stages of this and how he kind of does that formula even better as down the line.
Well, and part of the reason, especially with these early ones, I'm pointing out like there is obsession and questioning reality are very much core to a lot of his early work. But like he's also, like he doesn't let ideas go, as we'll talk, as you see with The Fountain, that he couldn't let it go. He ended up bringing it back. Noah ends up, which we'll talk about in part 2. That was an idea he'd had for a long time, that he ends up having these ideas for a long time before he finally brings them to fruition. And, that's fairly common for a lot of directors, sometimes to their detriment. Like you'll see, some of the worst, some of the more criticized things in the prequels are elements that George Lucas was originally trying to incorporate into the original trilogy, and just couldn't find space for. And, there's also like a story session where it's Lucas and Steven Spielberg and scriptwriter Lawrence Kasdan, and they're all just kind of spitballing ideas for the first Indiana Jones movie. And you see how many of those ideas get used in that one, but then how many of those ideas get saved and used in like Temple of Doom or Last Crusade, even. Uh, uh, that for whatever reason, as a creative person, there are a lot of times, you have this idea and you just keep, it keeps bothering you until you find a way to make it work, or you don't, um, and that also gets back, because a lot of his movies can also be seen as metaphors for the creative process.
Yeah, I could see it.
But The Fountain was one where I watched it when it initially came out and did not like it. I was like, I was kind of like the Krusty the Clown meme. What the hell was that? But I ended up really liking it when I watched it this time. I don't know if it's the difference between being like 22 or whatever I was at the time, 25, and being in my 40s, but I really enjoyed it, and the way the stories connect. Because basically Hugh Jackman's character is three different characters, but also one at the same time. And, it's about the fluidity of time and, all these other things, and trying to, about the importance of living in the moment, but it definitely worked a lot better for me. And there were a lot more, effects and, composition shots and CG stuff. And, it's obviously ropey because of the budget and the time period, but I'm not sure what caused, nearly 2 years of post-production on it, because it was not an extensively long shoot. Like, they were wrapped in like early 2005, and then, it's late 2006 before the film actually comes out. So I didn't see a lot of like studio interference or something causing it. Like, again, have no clue what was up in that time period.
Yeah, I don't know that movie at all.
Yeah. Like I said, it was good. Ellen Burstyn's also in it. That Aronofsky's one of those directors that works with a lot of people over and over again. Like, he works with Ellen Burstyn a couple times. He works with Jennifer Connelly a couple times. Another actor we'll probably talk about during Black Swan, potentially, Mark Margolis, is in just about every Aronofsky movie up until like The Whale or so. Which is a good sign that, people like working with him. That there are other directors, where they're nightmares to work with, and, people don't care for it. Next, eventually became a character piece, small in scope and budget, looking at the strange and fascinating world of professional wrestling, about an over-the-hill former star looking to recapture former glory as his body fails him. His story is contrasted by that of an aging stripper similarly struggling with time in her professional life. While the script had originated with Robert D. Siegel, at one point in time, Aronofsky had wanted to include pro wrestling in the ballet film he still had in his mind, so as to contrast the physical sacrifice both required, one for something thought of as the highest of high art, and the other for the lowest of low art, if acknowledged as art at all. Mickey Rourke was chosen for the male lead and Marissa Tomei for the female lead. The film was released on September 5th of 2008 at the Venice Film Festival, where it was picked up for distribution by Fox Searchlight. It received a limited release on December 17th, 2008, and a wide release on January 25th, 2009. The film was a major hit with critics, earning numerous awards and nominations, including Academy Award nominations for both Rourke and Tomei. It also performed very well at the box office, earning more than $44 million against a roughly $6 million budget. It was also a big hit within the wrestling industry, especially with many veterans from the 80s boom who saw themselves in Rourke's performance. World Wrestling Entertainment also heavily promoted the film and were working with Rourke on an angle that was to culminate in a match against Chris Jericho at WrestleMania 25. But Rourke backed out when he was nominated for the Oscar, as he feared participating would hurt his campaign. He still didn't win.
Yeah, so my brothers were into WWE when we were growing up, but like
Mm-hmm.
I would say I don't really have that much information about wrestling, but watching the movie, yeah, like the first like 30, 40 minutes, I was like, why are you doing this? Why are you hurting yourself so much? Like I don't get it. Like all for the entertainment, but like man, it really got to me because I was just like, why would you willingly staple yourself or like do all these other things? Like I can't really understand the hype of one hurting yourself, but also wanting to watch somebody put staples in themselves. If this is like legit stuff, WWE tends to get fake after a while. But like I think the film was very interesting for me to watch because it was like balancing that between like, yeah, we're talking about what we're gonna do to each other before we go out there, but they're still really actually hurting themselves, which is crazy.
Yeah. Well, and so to be clear, WWE, that's how it works too. Like they'll discuss a match, but the common parlance is you can't fake gravity. How do you learn to fall off a ladder? They will, in the more professional companies, WWE is still around and AEW, some of the bigger companies, they will gimmick things to a certain extent. But they still also do a lot of real stuff. And it's crazy. Even though everybody's in on it these days, it's part of the storytelling. I, like your brothers, was into, pro wrestling, especially when I was growing up. I grew up in what was called the Hulkamania era, which is, that 80s, the tail end of that 80s wrestling boom that Rourke's character was supposed to have been a part of, and so I watched a lot of wrestlers I grew up with end up kind of like Mickey Rourke's character, but also I kind of got out of wrestling for a while, and then as a teenager they had another resurgence called the Attitude Era. That's where like Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock and other guys got popular. And when I got back into it, that's where I started following more of what happened behind the scenes and the history of behind the scenes, which to me is always just as fascinating. And, to your point, Kristen, learning about the types of people who would be willing to do this to themselves, you know, because they are some very strange people, indeed. And
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like the people who like join the circus or other things where they will like do
yeah,
like they've got like an act. It's like a unique thing that they can do, kind of like that vibe. Because it's like it is cool in that way to that you're a type like that you are cool with doing those types of things. I can't relate, but good for them, I guess. But yeah, I mean, you get to see the results of like that kind of thing and how
yeah.
it affected his health and everything like that. So it was a really interesting film. So you and I hadn't talked about it, so I wanted to just let you know
Yeah,
what I
yeah, yeah.
thought.
No, no, no. I appreciate it. Well, and it was also, because, and I especially liked how they how they, you know, paired that with, the exotic dancing in Marissa Tomei's case, because, both industries that value youth, that do take, because if you ever talk to dancers, uh, it can take, a lot of that work can take a very physical toll on your body,
Mm-hmm.
but also how much they are judged on their looks and judged for aging and tossed aside when no longer deemed as valuable as they were at their peak, you know. Um, and, uh, some of that may also come in, later on when we talk about Black Swan. But I thought, that was some interesting commentary that I appreciated.
Yeah, definitely.
I think I need to support these dancers. Support dancers.
Yes, no, I always, and Rob, there's even unionized strippers out where you are. You can follow them at Strippers United, because go unions.
Really? Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Well, because another similarity between professional wrestling and stripping is very poor working conditions on the business side, where they're treated as independent contractors, where they should really be classified employees and don't have benefits and all sorts of other ways they get taken advantage of monetarily by the people in charge. But we could be here all day talking about that, and the crushing weight of capitalism that we all live under. But with his prospects once again on the rise, Darren decided that next he would focus on the other half of the once whole idea, the ballet. The story development of what would become Black Swan has its origins in Darren's youth of seeing the physical sacrifice his sister and other ballerinas went through. At some point, this timeline isn't super clear, but I think in the late 90s, based on everything else, a script called The Understudy by Andres Hines is submitted to Aronofsky. The script, according to Wikipedia, portrayed, quote, portrayed off-Broadway actors and explored the idea of being haunted by a double, unquote. The script was said to contain elements of three works. The Double is a Fyodor Dostoevsky novella about a man with poor social skills and morose attitude who is told by a doctor to meet new friends and soon meets a man who is his double, except with the social skills and grace that he lacks. They begin as friends, but then the man sees the double taking over his life and ends the story having a breakdown and in an asylum. Very typical Russian novel. It's probably going to depress the hell out of you. Another influence on the script came from The Tenant, a 1976 Roman Polanski film about a man who rents an apartment whose previous tenant had attempted to unalive themselves. He visits the woman in the hospital, but she is entirely in bandages and lets out a monstrous scream while he is there along with one of her friends. Lots of weird, unsettling things happen, and it gradually seems like the world is pushing him to be the previous tenant. And as he loses his grip on his sanity, he even finds himself dressing as her, before ultimately losing it all and jumping from the building like she did, only to find himself in the same hospital, in the same bed where she was, completely bandaged, and now watching himself and her friend have the same scene from earlier and letting out a monstrous scream. And the final piece was All About Eve, a movie from the 1950s which tells the story of an aging Broadway star played by Bette Davis, who at first befriends an overeager young fan played by Ann Baxter, only to have the fan infiltrate every aspect of her life, threatening her personal relationships and career in an apparent attempt to replace her. This classic film's plot has also been reused in movies like Showgirls and Magic Mike. Aronofsky liked the script, but wanted to move it to the world of ballet and also added in the element of Swan Lake. Again, the timeline isn't super clear, but it seems possible that even by the first conversation about the project he had in 2000 with Natalie Portman, he might have already had the understudy and made those changes. Now, the script would be revised further by Mark Heyman, who is the main credited writer, along with Hines and John McLaughlin, who, if I had to guess, is the one who did work in between Hines and Heyman. Heyman had been a producer at Aronofsky's production company, Protozoa Films, and had co-produced The Wrestler with him. Black Swan would be his first script. After The Wrestler wrapped, he spent some time observing, interviewing, and researching ballerinas before he began.
Yeah, the ballet scene is very much like the wrestling scene, where these people just really harm themselves to reach the level of perfection that they want to. But also, yeah, there's just so much pressure in the ballet scene to be absolutely perfect, which we will get into in the film. But it's interesting looking at some of the other inspirations for the script. It just goes into, I know we'll probably talk about Perfect Blue again, but tale as old as time, this story has, and that's kind of what seems to happen is is any idea truly original anymore? Something is a reworking of something else or a reference to something else. And you can kind of see how those three script inspirations are kind of an amalgamation of this.
Absolutely. And, I think the other thing, with ballet is like pro wrestling, like exotic dancing, it's also a subculture that has its own mores and rules and vocabulary and, ways of doing things, which is part of also why you have to, research it, as best you can. And we'll get into in part 2, the feeling from the ballet community on how accurately or inaccurately he was able to capture that.
I think the other thing that's kind of interesting is in this case, when it comes to ballet, this subculture is associated with, a certain amount of finances in your background.
Yes, and I think that definitely shows itself at a couple points in the film as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and that also gets back into when originally the ideas were two, contrasting the high art, which high art is usually connected with and defined by people with money, and low art, which is usually connected with and for people without money, and so anyway,
and workers' rights not being something that lives in either scenario.
Yeah.
Like it seems like you're disposable regardless.
It's all for the art. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and as Rob said, it's not just all for the art. It's you're disposable. That next one up. Well,
yeah, that's what I was saying. That's what I meant by all for the art. Like they care about the product at the end of the day.
All right. Well, with the script in hand, they were able to go back to Portman to see if she was still interested. In the time since they had initially discussed the idea of the movie, she had graduated from Harvard, and her star had only risen. Not only had she finished her run as Queen Amidala in the Star Wars prequels, but she had added movies like Garden State, Closer, and V for Vendetta, amongst numerous others, with Closer earning her first Academy Award nomination. Portman was excited with the script and would begin rigorous preparation for the film ahead of shooting. This included ballet training, cross-training, and strict dieting. Portman was a huge get, not just for the name value at the box office and help in securing funding, but also in recruiting additional cast members, as we kind of saw in Sorcerer and some of the other films we've talked about. Some actors will sign on because you already have one star, or they feel comfortable enough that the person playing a bigger part than theirs is a sufficient status for their name, for them to take the smaller part to have the lower billing on the marquee. Other times, it's simply because they are friends. That's exactly how Mila Kunis became involved in the project. Kunis was a child actor who had appeared in movies like Santa with Muscles, starring Hulk Hogan, because everything I talk about connects back to wrestling, before getting her break as Jackie on That 70s Show in 1998, when the 14-year-old lied about her age. She claimed to be 18 and only revealed the truth after securing the role. In 1999, she also replaced Lacey Chabert as the voice of Meg Griffin in Season 2 of The Family Guy. After That 70s Show ended in 2006, she began appearing in more movies like Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Extract, and Book of Eli. Kunis and Portman had been close friends for years, and so Kunis couldn't wait to join the project when she was approached. Like Portman, she began an intense training and diet regimen before filming. There was uncertainty around funding, and deals almost fell through. Ultimately, they secured a $13 million budget via Fox Searchlight on the reasoning the wrestler had grossed around $26 million domestically of that $44 million total. And given the subject matter, they felt there would be more limited interest in Black Swan than the wrestler. And so, they felt this was the recoupable amount. Keep that in mind when we get to part 2 and talk about how it actually did in comparison to the wrestler, to see if they were right or wrong.
Yeah, that's interesting because comping, her different demographics of fans, and you can make the argument that they were kind of skittish because she has so many kind of younger fans that would not be into this. But then she's also proven that what she can do in the previous movies that you mentioned, and it speaks to her growing as an actress and her fan base growing as well.
Yeah, well, and V for Vendetta had been a hard R movie, and she had carried the marquee on that, and it had been a big success. But I think it was also just more going, even if you're saying, okay, Portman is more of a name value than Rourke, because Rourke was, that was really a career. Rourke was almost the living embodiment of his character, where he had been a big star in 1980s Hollywood and really fallen on hard times. He'd had, he poked his head out a few other times since then, before The Wrestler, more recently in the first Sin City movie, but that reminded people of how good he was. But it was, Rourke didn't have a lot of box office marquee draw in 2009. Versus 2008 versus Natalie Portman. Definitely had some, but I think what they were saying is, as niche as a story about pro wrestling is, they felt a story about ballet was going to be even more niche and less accessible to audiences, regardless of how much name value Portman was bringing in, and hedged their bets accordingly.
It's funny that I guess I never realized that Kunis and Portman were like friends. But it's so funny to me that like they're friends, they do this movie together, and then within a couple years, I think it's like after this, I'll have to look up again, but they're both in rom-coms that have the exact same premise, but they're in two completely different movies.
Oh yeah.
No strings attached. Yeah, no strings attached. And then, yeah, like
Friends with Benefits.
Friends with Benefits, and they're the exact same premise. The same thing.
Well, and it's like, because that's a whole thing called twinning movies. Whether it's Volcano or Dante's Peak or Armageddon and Deep Impact. There were even like two Capote movies that came out around the same time. One was Capote. I think I can't remember the name of the other one. I don't think it was called In Cold Blood. That's the name of the original book. But anyway, Infamous maybe was Infamous and Capote, I think, were the two movies. Philip Seymour Hoffman won the Oscar for one. Anyway, that it happens all the time. Very famous phenomenon, but in Hollywood. But even stranger than just these two were in two different, Friends with Benefits, No Strings Attached, hookup movies. Mila Kunis was in, her co-star was Justin Timberlake. Natalie Portman's co-star was Ashton Kutcher, who'd obviously co-starred with Mila Kunis on that 70s show, but would then go on to marry Mila Kunis in real life. That was in the period before they were real IRL married or even dating. And so the cross connections between the two movies gets even more and more bizarre. It's
wild. Hell? I looked it up, and it was indeed in 2011. So, like, within a year of this, they were both.
Yeah, it was like right after they got done with this. They were both like, "Hey,
let's keep this sensuality going." That's what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Well, but yeah, I always thought that's so crazy that they are just in like the exact same movies, same year, same premise, like, and the fact that they're friends. That's so funny.
Yeah, I had no idea that they were friends until I was watching or reading stuff about the movie, because I also watched through, like the special features, and I can't remember where it came up, but, I think it was maybe in one of the special features where Natalie Portman was like, oh yeah, no, Mila, or maybe Darren Aronofsky was like, Natalie had been friends with Mila for years and thought she would be perfect and recommended her. And so, was really insistent that she would be perfect for the role. So, that could be, wherever I got that, it potentially could have come out, because a lot of the information, whether it's written articles or stuff on the extras, is all material created around the time of the movie. So it's all kind of fluffy press material. Mm-hmm. So, there's always the potential they're just saying that. Who knows how true it was,
Yeah.
But I like to think they're friends. I mean, they had good chemistry. So.
Oh, yeah.
Filming began in late 2009 and lasted approximately 43 days. Filming took place in and around New York, especially for exteriors, and at SUNY Purchase, doubling for the interiors of the New York City Ballet. SUNY is the State University of New York system, and Purchase is located in Westchester County, which is northeast of the Manhattan Peninsula near the Connecticut border, and the home of the fictional Xavier Institute for Gifted Children. Dancers from the Pennsylvania Ballet were used to fill out the rest of the dance corps. Sarah Lane and Maria Rossetto were the dancing doubles for Portman and Kunis, respectively, because as hard as they trained, they could not become full top-level ballerinas in just a few months. In addition to old-fashioned tricks when using doubles of any kind, such as obscuring or just not showing a character's face, or cutting from the face to the body or part of the body doing the action, the production utilized new technology, such as using computers to replace the dancers' faces with the leads in some of the bigger dance scenes. Computer effects were further utilized to help with some of the reality questioning sequences and especially the film's closing sequence. The dance sequences were choreographed by Benjamin Mila, who was the lead dancer at the New York Ballet at the time. Milipede had been born in France before coming to America full-time in 1993 to study ballet and then joining the New York Ballet in 1995 and working his way up to the top position. He would also perform on screen in the film as Portman's dance partner. Between acting as her dance partner and choreographing everything, it meant Portman and Milipede spent quite a lot of time together. Keep that in mind for part 2 and the aftermath. The film premiered at the 67th Venice Film Festival on September 1st, 2010. From there, it played many of the other big festivals before opening in limited release on December 3rd, 2010.
So, fun fact, this will be a good fact that Adam will enjoy. So the guy Millipede, who did a lot of the dancing for this, also choreographed the Sandwalk in Dune.
Yes, no, I had seen that.
And did a little bit of choreography for some Barbie movies as well. Yeah. Very different vibe. But yeah, animated like children kind of dancing for ballet stuff.
Well, and just to clarify for listeners, it's probably obvious, but when she says choreograph the Sandwalk for Dune, she's talking about the Denis Villeneuve Dune from 2021 and its sequel, but not the 1984 David Lynch Dune. But yeah, no, it's interesting how it all came up together. It was also interesting. You had a lot of establishing shots and, like 1 or 2 core scenes that take place, around the fountain area of Lincoln Center. But it was interesting that they didn't actually, and it's in part, because it's, full-time operation. So, it's hard to find, to create space for them to do the filming inside the, New York Ballet proper. But, it was interesting that they didn't actually do any filming in there and used SUNY as a stand-in.
I thought it was really good, though, obviously, frequently visited places in New York that people know well. You just instantly you get familiar, you know the setting very well. So it brings you there.
I was distracted most of the time. They used those shots for 2 reasons. One, we'll get to the, obviously when we go through the plot, we'll get through the main scene that happens around the fountain. But obviously there, I just kept thinking back to, there's a very famous scene from the 1984 Ghostbusters with Bill Murray and Sigourney Weaver that I just kept thinking about. And the other thing I kept thinking about, so like as you're looking, Lincoln Center, for somehow you haven't seen Black Swan before, or even if you've seen it, it's the 3 buildings surrounding a fountain. And I believe the ballet is, it seems like it's the one on the left. I off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you what the other 2 buildings are. But So if you, from the back of the ballet, if you go over a street, there's a cross street where that building is just like a plain brick white wall. And next to it is some buildings belonging to Fordham University. I know all this because when I was shooting my student film at the New York Film Academy, we'd been filming all day in Central Park, up in the southwestern portion of Central Park, which abuts near Lincoln Center. And the last shot I needed was just a couple of my characters. And I'm not going to get into what the plot is because it's very stupid and would take too long to explain. But I just needed them up against a plain, like, government kind of looking building wall. And saw the white wall for Lincoln Center, like, okay, perfect. And we're shooting guerrilla style because we're students. We don't have permits for anything. So we're getting ready to set up the shot. And some guy in a golf cart comes around and starts going, "You have a permit?" "No." "Well, I'm going to stop you from filming here. Lincoln Center doesn't want anyone filming, even though you can't tell it's Lincoln Center. It's a plain white brick wall, you know? So, and I'm going to follow you to make sure you don't." I'm like, okay. So we literally just went across the street, found one of Fordham's walls that would work just as well, filmed that, and left. But that was where my little introduction, my little nickname in the introduction came from. Was this caused me to constantly remember, oh yeah, I got kicked out from filming just right over there.
Yeah, you have a personal connection.
Yes.
You know, something else I wanted to bring up was it makes sense to me that they would have like professional dancers standing in for them because, yeah, like you cannot become a ballerina within a couple months. Like it is very much like figure skating where you've got to get into it when you're young or you can't, like, it's really, really hard to break out and actually like maintain a career. Like you have to be dedicated for years and years.
Yeah. Now, admittedly, you know, the good thing with Kunis and Portman is they both definitely have the body types of ballerinas. That definitely believable in that way. In the same way, you know, so one thing I didn't mention with the wrestler is Rourke actually wasn't the initial actor attached. He was the first choice Aronofsky had in mind, but initially he wasn't available or something, so they'd initially signed on Nick Cage. And there's some dispute about, you know, Nick was a gentleman, like Aronofsky has said, oh, Nick was a gentleman and he bowed out because we really wanted Mickey. Nick Cage has said part of the reason he left the project was he wasn't willing to do all the steroids it was going to take to look like a 80s pro wrestler. And, you know, whereas Mickey Rourke obviously was. The one knock you would have against Rourke, especially as trying to be a top star from that era, is I believe he is not I believe he's a sub 6 foot guy, which would probably, which would be too small. Like even today, like that's a guy who would get a little knocked for his height, especially in the bigger promotions. Less so AEW these days, but but that's also, it gets into, for movies, whether it's about sports or, ballerinas or wrestling, there are certain things where having a very specific body type is crucial to the role. And so then that starts very much limiting you in the people you have available to you. And sometimes you have to sacrifice perfect realism for, ability or name value or stuff like that.
Yeah, because generally speaking, like Natalie Portman had the body type. She didn't really have the muscles in her legs, but that's getting that's going too far.
Well, that will also get into because they were very much, I think, trying to emphasize the eating disorders inherent in the system by showing her at because she is all, even just naturally, like if you see her in anything else, I think just by nature, by habit, I think she is a very petite person. And she obviously worked very hard to then exaggerate that natural petiteness to seemingly unhealthy level on screen. Hopefully she was doing that in the healthiest way possible off screen. And that also gets into, one of the, constant issues, some of what we were even talking about, like with Sorcerer and, some of the links they were going to get shots of, where is the line between really doing things, really, and really harming people and, like, okay, this is just a movie, like let's back off, I mean, and Kristen, that's, kind of the same idea behind The Wrestler in and of itself is, why would people go to these lengths to harm themselves, to hurt themselves for something that's not real? You could ask the same thing about actors doing that kind of thing for a part,
Right.
A very difficult conversation, especially about, where you draw the line. But, yeah, no, I think, everybody did a great job. There was some controversy, especially because, as we'll talk about, when you get into award pushes, sometimes the hype around what an actor did or didn't do for a role can get a little exaggerated and leave out, some of these doubles and, the work they had to do.
Yeah, and they did have real dancers in a lot of the extras and a lot of the other parts of the sets. Like, so, they had to have some of the bigger name people in the forefront. But yeah, I think it was cool how a lot of the people who were actually in the ballet were cast in this movie as people to like supplement everything.
And also, her friend Kunis, they didn't show too much of her, like without, like they didn't show too much in a like a skin tight or very revealing outfit, so you couldn't really tell if she was really in that shape.
Yeah, well, like with Portman, like with her body, we'll talk about it later. But there's the scene early in the film where, she's just in her underwear, and you're seeing her back, and how thin she is, and I think that's meant to be a commentary on that thinness. But we'll talk about all that as we get to it. With all that, I think it's probably time. Whether it's at the 67th Venice Film Festival or one of the other big festivals, or once it, hit theaters, it's time to grab our ticket, get some popcorn, and head on inside. Kristen, take us through the plot.
So we're going to start here with our main character, Nina Sayers, who is played by Natalie Portman. And she is having this dream of dancing as the White Swan. And in her dream, it's a male partner taking on the Black Swan role, and he like transforms to this demon-like thing. And that's when she jerks awake. She goes into the kitchen to get some breakfast of grapefruit and chats with her overprotective mother, Erica. And she lives with her mother. We learn from just the little bits of conversation that Nina works for the New York City Ballet Company, and her mother is a former ballerina who's very strict with her, very precise. And so we get the big picture. We get that, she's dreaming about becoming the White Swan. She's a ballet dancer, and when she arrives at the company, you get to see all the other dancers that are all getting ready for the day. And in that conversation, they are talking about the prima ballerina Beth and how she's getting too old for the top spot. And Nina finds that really sad because she believes that Beth has really great talent. But in this industry, they don't care necessarily. Like, obviously they care about talent, but they also care about fresh, young faces, the look, the aesthetic of things. And in this opening scene, we also get a really brief moment where we see the new dancer, Lily, who's from San Francisco, who rushes in, and she's late because she missed her stop. And so the other dancers treat her coldly because, somebody new coming into the mix, they don't really care to get to know people. It's a very solitary kind of place to be in ballet. There are definitely people who make friends, from my understanding, but it's definitely like everybody's in competition with each other, so it can be hard to make friends in that kind of environment.
Yeah. Well, and that gets into the same as pro wrestling, as the world of exotic dancing, but also just the world of acting as well. I remember when I was looking at acting schools, years and years and years ago, most of them worked on the conservatory approach where it was competitive throughout your 4 years. And so part of what that meant is, like, if you started with a class of like say 60 in your freshman acting class, you would then have only 40 spots in your sophomore class. And so no matter, like, even if everybody was equally as good, 20 people were not going to be able to come back for your sophomore year. And then say it would only be 20 people, for your junior year, and then 10 people for your senior year. And so and that's meant to emulate, the real competitiveness of the real world, and, what you have to do to win parts and blah, blah, blah. But, it also creates this cutthroat nature, it reinforces this cutthroat nature of, you're not really friends with anyone because you're all competing for the same thing,
By now, I think we've already established that Natalie Portman plays Nina Sayers, and that Mila Kunis plays Lily.
Yep.
But Nina's mother is played by Barbara Hershey. Erica Sayers is the character's name. Barbara Hershey has a career spanning over 50 years, a variety of TV and films in different genres. I think that, first of all, she began acting at 17. It's a long career. And that was in 65, but she didn't really achieve a lot of critical acclaim until the 80s. And she got a number of awards and nominations for her performances. An Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actress in a miniseries TV film for her role in A Killing in a Small Town, a Golden Globe nomination for Best Supporting Actress in her role for Portrait of a Lady, 2 Best Actress awards at the Cannes Film Festival for her roles in Shy People and A World Apart. After this role in Black Swan, Hershey became part of the Insidious franchise, if you will, and she also had a recurring role on the ABC hit drama Once Upon a Time. I think the last movie she was in 2022 for the action thriller 9 Bullets.
Yeah. On one of her early breakout parts was in the mid-'70s. She was in the early Scorsese film Boxcar Bertha, along with David Carradine, who she was briefly married to. They had a kid together before breaking up. And then she was also in a couple of Barry Levinson films. She was, who we talked about in our Toys episode. She was in The Natural and Tin Man, at least. She's very good. Yeah, no, she's one of those, like, she pops up a lot more than you think, and once you recognize her, you see her in a lot more stuff. But no, very good, very talented.
I think already this early on in the film, I know that I'm starting to even kind of question a little bit the mom. I saw her being very.
Yeah. She is, like, I'm wanting to ask her, like, if she took parenting tips from Norman Bates's mother.
Yeah.
Right. You're right. Like, I didn't know if she was hiding something, if she was unstable. I didn't even know if she was real for a long time.
Yeah, you can already tell there's, like, some tension in the beginning for sure.
Well, and, like, again, like, they, like, some of what I watched, like, it's like with the set designer and stuff, and, like, it was, like, very deliberate. They wanted to show how Nina's development had been arrested just through her bedroom.
Mm-hmm. And we can talk about that because I know we get a little more detail of the room later on. Because it has a very childlike look to it. Something else I really wanted to highlight in this beginning part was just some of the attention to detail with the ballet scenes. Like, you get to see this moment where they're breaking in the ballet slippers and just what it takes to do that. And just, you have to just, like, basically, like, beat them up and move them around. And also, like, they can really mess up your feet if they're not broken in properly. And so I really liked those little details that kind of added to the immersion element to kind of get a feel for this kind of story that we're going to be telling.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, what are we doing here with this ballet? To open the season, what we're going to do is the Swan Lake, Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. So Thomas, the art director, decides that they want to do it, but they're going to strip it down. They're going to do it a little different than everybody else. And so the Swan Queen would perform both the white and the black swan parts. And so the dual roles represent the innocent and fragile white swan Odette and the sensual and dark swan Odile. And basically it's like one steals the man of the other. But in this one, instead of that, they are both still going to be played by the same person. And so that's an interesting challenge for a ballerina, because for someone like Nina, who has kind of wanted to be the white swan all of her life, she's embodied this innocent and fragile look. And now she's expected to also embody the sensual and dark side. So as she prepares for the auditions, she is struggling a little bit. And before that, we have to talk about Beth, the prima ballerina, the one who may be getting axed because she's too old. And she is destroying her room after getting the news that she is going to be forced into retirement. And they have and Nina and Beth make eye contact, but it's kind of one of those what are you looking at kind of vibes. And then Nina goes into the room and takes one of Beth's lipsticks, because she kind of is really inspired by her and wants to kind of be like her. And so it's kind of like a form of taking a bit from her. And so after that moment, we do see Nina give a flawless audition as Odette, because that's what she's been trained. That's what she's been wanting to do all of her life, but she cannot embody Odile. And so Tamad dismisses her. And at home, she tries to practice and just is convinced that she will be able to nail it. And she overdoes it, lands on her toe wrong. And then her mom comforts her about the poor audition, tucks her into bed and all of that. And that's when we get to see a little bit more of the bed now. If you guys want to talk about it. Yeah, I mean, there's so much. It looks like a child bed, honestly, that she's put in.
Yeah, well, I mean, because it's probably size wise, it's probably like a double. It's not like a queen or a king size bed. And, I mean, some of it's also just practicality because it's a New York City apartment. But,
right.
Some of it's also then just the set design of the rest of the room, where it's still stuffed animals and light pink colors, that you would associate with you could easily see it being a, 9-year-old girl's bedroom. And, it's clearly telling you that, and it's telling you that, this is how her bedroom has been since she was a child. And you get the implication that it's more the mother won't let her change it, than she doesn't change it. But at the same time, again, kind of also getting back to, did she take parenting tips from Norman Bates's mother? Her mother is she comforts her, but she's also like, well, did you really try? Have you tried really talking to him? Kind of hinting at maybe you should do a little bit more than talk when you present your case.
I mean, there's a lot of that you're not sure of yet, and so you don't know if the mom is the one that has over pampered her, and you can tell by the room that's happening. Is it because she's protecting her daughter because her daughter is very fragile? Is that what it is, or is she an overprotect? You're still not sure, but there's a whole lot of signs hitting you that something is. I don't know. I don't know what to say off, but definitely kind of strange, and there's more to be unraveled here. But it's really interesting because you're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and you can tell just from the environment that she's in, and the fact that, like I said, she's been wanting to be this white swan role a lot of her life, and it's kind of what she's been aiming towards. And so she's been kind of raised to do that, be that way, very poised, very focused on that. And so it's I think that this is something that happens with a lot of people who are dedicated to the craft. They don't have time for dating. They don't have time for other things. So when it comes to the sensual side, Nina has no idea how to even consider that part of her life, because it's something she's never really put any thought into. And living in this environment where she's babied and treated so fragile and so childlike, it's not something that's even been on her radar until this moment. So it's interesting because it's this little pinprick is the smallest bit of an awakening that will be coming. But yeah.
The other thing you have seen throughout this early sequence. We haven't talked about Thomas very much, but he is also a world-class, number one creepazoid.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, you see that much more later. We will see the creep
Yeah.
in our next section.
Like at this point, I already think he's a creep and don't like him. It's just like he's at 10, he's going to take it to 11, Spinal Tap style.
Yeah, it's like in the beginning you get a vibe and you're like, God, I hope I'm wrong, and then you're not.
One of the reasons why is because we've kind of seen him play certain roles in different movies. Tomas's character is played by Vincent Cassel, and he's a French actor that started to slowly make some hit some roles in the U.S. I think that one of the bigger ones that we know him from are movies like Oceans. The Oceans franchise, Oceans 12, 13. He was in the movie Elizabeth. He was in Eastern Promises. Jason Bourne is one. I mean, where he plays a bad guy in that movie. He was in the HBO series Westworld. Like I said, he started out in France and he achieved, I guess, worldwide recognition, if you will, from France, playing a troubled Jewish youth in the 1990 film La Haine, I believe is how you say it. And beyond the roles and the films that I mentioned in the U.S. side, I think like he's got that character face, and those eyes are penetrating, and he plays it up very well. Not to say it's hard to play, and I hope I'm not taking anything away from him, but there are certain aspects of his role, male chauvinist, that it's not hard to play, but he does it really well, especially from a highbrow perspective.
Yeah, well, and it's especially, I think, I don't know Vincent Cassel personally. I would like to think, this is very much a stretch for him as a human being, that he is not like this person. But I would also say, given his age and growing up in France when he did, this person is very familiar to him. So it becomes much easier to play that because you're just playing someone you have seen, 1,000 times, throughout your life. Like for me, it would not be hard to play a good old boy because I grew up around him, and that kind of gently bigoted, not meaning to necessarily be bigoted, but are, that well-intentioned, bigoted, slightly country, lower middle class kind of person, was, I could, not spit without hitting one of those when I was growing up. So that would be a very easy role for me to play.
And I want to make sure it's not it's not forgotten that at this point in the film, it feels very real that Natalie Portman's character is not going to get the role because it looks like she really can't achieve it. She's having what seems to be more of a mental blockage, an issue playing a role that is challenging her to move very differently and break the rules as well. Like one of the things that the Black Swan character that she's being challenged to play, which is the opposite of the White Swan character, is interpolation or just kind of some kind of more relaxed approach to the way you're dancing, but also very sensual and things that are not innate to Natalie Portman's character.
Yeah. Well, and, like she is, they kind of describe her as you're doing the moves exactly technically right, but you have no flow, no passion, no sense, that there is no loose. Yeah, well, and it's very rigid, like martinet. It's we do a lot of work with jazz, and it's like they talk about, part of jazz is not just playing the notes exactly as they are written in, the exact, matter. It's giving them a, unique twist and flow to them, and so you might not be, like if you were in a music school, with the teacher tapping the baton, exactly right, but it carries more, it still comes across better, when it has that proper flow that you can't fake. And, that, just like some musicians struggle with that, dancers and, performers of all kind can struggle to find that looseness.
One thing I didn't really think about until like even watching this far into the movie is how much facial expressions and posture expressions translate in dancing to convey those emotions. So that was a kind of a really cool takeaway to kind of make you appreciate those performers a little bit more and what it takes to be at that higher level.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, and Kristen, I know you had kind of commented earlier, or maybe it was offline, about seeing the flip phones made you think of the time period, and flip phones, especially because like the iPhone was out by now, it just hadn't become smartphones were just on the edge of becoming everywhere. That I think if like the movie was made like a year or so later, it would have had smartphones and it wouldn't be as noticeable. But the other thing that like really marks it of its time for me is a lot of Mila Kunis's character. And we'll get into it more as we see more of her character. But I think by this point, you've already seen she has the wing tattoos on her back. And I cannot tell you how many women I knew at that time who had that exact tattoo. I was like, oh God. It's just like, okay, that's taking me back. Like that is such a 2010-ish thing to see.
I feel like modern equivalent now is like the flower arm piece. Yeah. That's like very popular now with women. But yeah, it's interesting when you look at all the different trends. The tattoo trends can just as well show you a time period as anything else, like facial hair, whatever.
Yeah. But it was, like it's interesting that just happened to be the in-style tattoo at the time. And it makes perfect sense, with Mila Kunis's character as you learn more about her. Like, oh yeah, she is the exact type of girl who would have that kind of tattoo in 2010, or 2009.
Yeah, and they're building an archetype. They're trying to build this archetype of what type of character she is, like sexually liberated and all of that. Like the complete opposite of Nina.
Right. But then, so like I think to a viewer, like you said, movie has become very popular with Gen Z and the younger set. They might feel like that element is more contrived than it would have seemed at the time, just because those were so popular. Like I'm sure, there, even if you're go in watching, like I'm watching a movie called Black Swan, about Swan Lake and this, that, and the other thing. There are probably a lot of people who just, because they were so used to seeing it at the time, didn't necessarily register like, oh, her having the wings also makes thematic sense.
Yeah, very on the nose about it. Yeah.
Right.
I think you could also say that the younger generation sees themselves as Mila and Natalie Portman's character as the older generation, and that the older generation is crazy.
I mean, you say that about every generation, but and we can get into that more. But I just thought, that was, interesting, and because it from like the 2000s on, outside of like, some tech aspects, because style hasn't. There are fewer style indications in movies and TV. Like the style difference between a movie from 2005 and a movie from 2025 is far smaller than the style difference from a movie from 1985 to 2005. You know what I mean? And so, when you do see those differences, they feel stronger because there is so few of them, if you know what I mean.
There's one thing that I want to point out too, just where we're at so far, is I know that it when you see the ballet dancer who basically was kind of forced out, like she's letting, like it's known now that she's no longer the future. She's old news. And I think that character's name is Beth, right? Yes, Beth McIntyre. You're still kind of not exactly sure what kind of like, wait, what are we missing here and why? How much it has to do with some back play that Thomas is doing? Like, what's... And so I didn't know what to think of that. I think that's a good thing, but it made me like really kind of pay attention to, all right, something's going on here where it's that easy to transition from one star to another, and your career is just instantly over.
Yeah, well, especially because Thomas, he's coming across very predatory, but he's also portraying it like, oh, it's Beth's decision to move on. Like, oh, she has decided to retire, and you see that framing, later on when we get to part 2. But it's it's again, you're questioning, what's really going on here, and how much of a, just how much and what kind of a scumbag is Thomas at this point. So, but that is where we are going to have to leave things for today. Can Nina win the role? Can she stand up to the pressure? If she does, will she ever stand up to her beloved smother? Come right back here for part 2 to find out. While you wait for part 2, take some time to tell us all the things we got right, all the things we got totally wrong, and everything in between. You can do that in the comments if the platform you listen to us allows comments. If not, you can do that on social media. We are at Savage Movie Night on Instagram and Facebook. Follow us there to stay up to date on the latest with the show, and drop in the comments to share your thoughts. Thanks so much to our editor, Javi, and the entire Savage Content team. Thanks so much to my co-hosts, Rob and Kristen. Thanks so much to our sponsor, No Regrets, the spirit and music of Billie Holiday. And most importantly, thanks so much to all of you for listening. Please give us 5 stars and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, you can give us a like, a follow, ring the bell, drop in the comments, all the good YouTube things. I've been your host, Adam, and we'll see you next time on the Savage Movie Night Podcast.